So the previous example that I just gave is about asking guiding questions as part of elaborating, and it certainly can involve students a little bit more. The question becomes, if that whole process is done to make the input more comprehensible, then it's still an MIC. Okay, repeats key language features. The teacher repeats language features. So using the same language at a slower pace, this can be very useful, particularly for new language and particularly for novice or lower level learners. Say it again more slowly. Articulating key pronunciation features. Articulating key pronunciation features. Pronunciation features, not pronunciation, right? So again, we're emphasizing important things about pronunciation so they don't miss it, so it's more comprehensible. Emphasizing key language. So it's key language, it's important language, so we make sure that they can hear it. Reusing similar language patterns or words over the course of a lesson, over the course of a course, over the course of a semester, etc. This is important because if they hear something again and again and again, then they know what to expect, whether it's about your instructions or it's about key language for them. It's less for them to process, and it makes the rest of the class easier to understand. For example, let's say over the course of a semester they hear something like, ask your partners, which is key teacher talk because it's instructions about what to do. If you keep saying it that way, ask your partners, ask your partners, ask your partners, well, it's less for them to process, and it helps them learn that language that you'd like them to learn and do it in a way that leads to learning. Remember, the teacher uses techniques to help students understand all kinds of new input: reading, listening, and teacher talk. Leading to scaffolding. Now, don't be alarmed, there are 4 kinds of scaffolding, but they're pretty easy to understand once you consider the purpose of scaffolding. The purpose is to promote output and interaction that students are not doing autonomously. So if they were doing this already, then you wouldn't need it, but they're not, so we need this to promote their output and interaction. Material scaffolding is tricky because students often confuse it, as I said earlier, with MIC visuals. So using the whiteboard, using written text, using visuals, these can all be used to make input comprehensible, but then we're talking MIC visuals. If you're using that for new language, then it's MIC visuals. Like the elephant example, if you're using a picture of an elephant to help them understand the word elephant, that's MIC visuals. If you're using the same picture of an elephant to help them discuss how can we take care of this elephant, then that would be more about material scaffolding. Okay? Using written texts. Now, if those written texts are designed so that the students talk to each other about that written material scaffolding. Manipulatives, from the Latin motto, if it's something that they can handle with their hands, in their hands, turn around and flip over in their hands and feel it and touch it, that's a manipulative. And this is great, especially for younger learners who need that neural pathway. You might remember from the SLA lesson about Vygotsky, you watched the Charlie video. And in the Charlie video, Charlie's mom is saying, touch each block. Well, when you touch something and you say it and you hear it, it's a lot easier to process and it's a lot easier to remember. Verbal scaffolding. Now, if you're using your words to help students to produce output and interact, then we're talking scaffolding. Repetition, verbal scaffolding, repetition, not to be confused with MIC, repeat. And yes, we change the word form deliberately to emphasize the difference. Then we're talking verbal scaffolding. So when the students because the doer of the action is the students. When the students repeat something, when you say repeat after me, that's verbal scaffolding repetition. Answering individually. If I say your name and ask you a question, that's verbal scaffolding, answering individually. S1 to S2 questions, you've seen these before. S1, can you ask S2, blah, blah, blah. This way, two students are interacting, two students are producing output, one is asking a question and the other is answering. Giving opinions, verbal scaffolding, giving opinions. Now, this is important because students like to talk about what they believe. And everyone likes to talk about their opinions, right? But be careful, because sometimes what we see is, in your lesson plans, you'll write something like, hey, what do you think is in this picture? And someone says a face and someone says a cloud. Technically, it's what they think, but is that really an opinion? That's opinions. For me, opinions are deeply held beliefs, and that's why we have it as an interaction. No, they're not just guesses, in other words. Keep that in mind. And yes, that's an ICC connection to beliefs. Okay. Personalizing. Anytime you have students talk about themselves, that's personalizing. Everyone likes to talk about themselves. Summarizing. Now, let's say you gave instructions in 12 words and you want the student to summarize your instructions in, say, 5 words. That would be summarizing. Keep in mind, this is an intermediate level interaction for intermediates and above. Not to be confused with paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is basically say it in your own words. Okay? Not to be confusing, which is when the teacher is saying it in her own words in a different way to help students to understand. Cueing is when the teacher says one word or the first sound or the first letter, right, to cue the appropriate response. Requesting help, the teacher asks a student to ask for help. So that way, at least the student who's in trouble has practiced asking for help, which is a learning strategy. Giving a complete sentence. You want to push those novice highs up to the intermediate